Hi, I'm Peter Coroneos from Cybermindz, and I'd like to welcome you all to this segment of SOC Appreciation Day. Can I just start by expressing my thanks to Devo, who have been really visionary in creating a SOC Appreciation Day. I really think it's important to recognize the value of the work that SOC teams and SOC analysts do as a critical part of the cybersecurity landscape. And it's a great pleasure to be here today on behalf of Cybermindz to share with you some of the mental health aspects of working in the job, some of the challenges that we see, but also the solutions that we can bring to help lighten your load a little bit and keep you happy and connected and remaining in these critical roles that we need you to be doing. I'm going to talk today on two or three aspects of mental health. Firstly, I want to look at some of the neurology, the neuroscience that underpins stress and burnout, but also I'm going to introduce you to the concept of neuroplasticity. If this is a term you haven't come across before, it's the idea that the brain is able to rebuild in very positive ways. And that's really what we are attempting to equip cyber teams with as we bring our programs into your realm. We're also going to do a little bit of a dive into the specific pressures that face SOC analysts and teams. I believe that there are uniquenesses around these roles that aren't encountered in other aspects of cybersecurity. And for that reason, I think it's worth taking a look at what are the risk factors to watch out for. And again, what are the strategies that we can start to bring in to help secure you in your profession. Thirdly, I do want to introduce you to a deeper examination of the actual methodology, how we go about protecting SOC analysts and cyber teams in general. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the iRest, or the Integrative Restoration Protocol, which is the primary tool that we use when we bring mental health support into cyber teams. But let me start with a little bit of neuroscience. I just want to give you a little bit of an evolutionary history in basically how we have developed the kind of defensive and threat detection mechanisms that we have as humans, and also how these are optimized for some environments but not for others. So this, as you can see, is a diagram of the human brain, a cross section, and it's showing a number of structures here, and I'm going to walk you through these in a moment. Basically, you've all heard of the flight or fight response, and this is basically this aspect of our defensive mechanisms, where if we see a danger, if we perceive a danger in our physical environment, then we're able to respond very quickly to that. And that's as a result of the interplay of these various structures within what we call the limbic system. Now, the limbic system evolved about 200 million years ago in the early mammals, the proto-mammals, to be able to respond more quickly to threats than would occur having to do a full analysis of the threat, or to rely simply on fear without the capacity to learn from experience. So the limbic system is really an experiential learning and then reactive system that bases our responses to situations on a rough approximation of whether or not the threat looks like something that we may have encountered before. Now, one of the principal structures in the limbic system is this colored structure shown in the center there called the amygdala. The amygdala has a primary role of detecting incoming information from the environment, primarily through the sensory systems, the vision, the hearing, touch, taste, and smell, are interpreted by the amygdala as giving you a rough yes or no, almost like a traffic light system of whether this is likely to be a threat or if it's not. Now, the key point about the limbic system, as opposed to you can see the gray convoluted or wrinkled area of the brain, particularly on the left-hand side, that's known as the prefrontal cortex. And that's the part of the brain where you're doing your analytical reasoning, your deep thinking, and your slow evaluation of a situation. Now, of course, threats are not always going to afford you the luxury of doing a deep analysis before you decide how you're going to respond. And so the role of the limbic system is really to short circuit the thinking part of the brain and instead to move you into more of an emotional response to the danger that you're confronting. So when the incoming threats are determined as being credible, the amygdala will set off a chain reaction that involves the hippocampus, which stores prior memories, also the hypothalamus, which is that tiny organ to the left of the hippocampus, which is responsible for initiating the release of cortisol, which then switches everything on. We call this the sympathetic nervous system. It's like the gas pedal in a car, where the moment the cortisol levels increase under the influence of the hypothalamus, you start to turn on all the parts of the body that are responsible for your physical defense. So in other words, your muscles will mobilize, more blood supply to them, eyes, the pupils will dilate. So you're bringing in more incoming signals from the environment, visual signals, heart rate will increase, the skin can, your hair stands on end, all the stuff that you'd be very familiar with in a typical flight fight kind of response. And the idea is that this is a very rapid action, but also not very accurate response to a threat environment. It'll get you out of danger. And the next slide shows you. So here you see a physical threat actor in the form of a large bear. And then you've got these three hunters that are attempting to defend themselves, to subdue the adversary, as it were. And the idea is that the limbic system will be in full flight here. Their cortisol levels will be sky high. And hopefully at some point they're going to be subduing the animal and the threat will subside. Now, one of the things about the limbic system is that it is really optimized only for physical threats. And so as we begin a discussion of cyber threats and the cyber threat environment and the kind of incoming signals that you're confronting in a SOC team, you'll very quickly recognize that these are not physical cues that you're getting. There's no physical danger present, immediately at least. As a result, the limbic system does not have the capacity to know when the danger is past. So if you're in a constant high threat environment where there are incoming alerts coming, a lot of false positives as well, you're constantly in this state of what we call hypervigilance, where you're being prepared for anything at any moment. And as a result of that, we find that the limbic system remains locked on. It remains switched on. And so these levels of cortisol, instead of coming down after the immediate threat has passed, remain elevated. And this can have long-term consequences on your physical health. It can lead to, high blood pressure and other things that, as it arises as a consequence. The anxiety and the hypervigilance is a natural response to a threat that appears to be constant and also could come from any direction. Now, over time, we find that you adapt to this situation, and this curve here is known as the Yerkes-Dodson law bell curve. And basically what it's mapping is your level of performance against your level of arousal. Arousal in this case means, the stimulation of the limbic system, the extent to which everything is switched on. Now, you'll see that at the top of the bell curve, there is an optimal level of performance and arousal, which is where we really want to be. On the left-hand side of the curve, we see that at very low levels of arousal, because it's mapping against the y-axis of performance, you're going to have very weak levels, low levels of performance. So this might be a situation where you're bored, where there's not much going on, not much stimulation occurring, and so you would expect the levels of performance to be correspondingly low. As we start to increase our intention and interest in the subject matter at hand, we start to switch systems on that are mapping to activation of the thinking analytical mind, and we get into that peak period where we want to be. However, and this really sort of harks back to the earlier slides, when that system is overstimulated and the level of arousal remains high constantly, you start to see a fall off in performance because of anxiety. And this is where we don't want to be. And so our aim within Cybermindz and working with you and your leadership and your teams is to move you back into that peak period at the top of the bell curve. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, before I go into the exact nature of how, let me just explain one other aspect of neuroscience, which I think is relevant at this point. And that is that the brain will actually adapt to changes in its external environment through a process which we know as neuroplasticity. On the right-hand side of this slide here, you'll see a brain cell called a neuron. And we begin with about 80 to 100 billion of these from the age that we're born up until the early teens. So it was traditionally believed that you ended up with your full quota by the time you're a mid-teenager. And after that, these neurons didn't really increase. They weren't able to regenerate. However, on the lower right-hand corner, you'll see what is known as a synapse. And these are the connections between neurons, which definitely do increase with age and with experience and with learning. So that as you're learning things, you're forming new connections. And that's what explains our capacity as humans, at least, to learn so much and to adapt so well to changes in our environment. Now, around the late 1990s, they've started to make discoveries in stroke patients using physical therapy and associated therapeutic techniques. They were able to actually regenerate areas of the brain. And this was very unexpected. They didn't expect to see that because, of course, as I said, we first initially believed that the number of brain cells was largely fixed and didn't grow into adulthood. But the stroke studies started to show, and it was supported by MRI studies where we could actually do scans of the brain. And sure enough, they started to find that brain development could occur in response to changes in the environment. Now, as I say, it can be a good thing, but it also can be a bad thing. And so what we found when we started to look at the stress studies around burnout and in particular trauma, we started to see that the amygdala was starting to enlarge in people that had constant stress, particularly in people that had trauma, prior trauma. You find that the amygdala has grown in size by this process of neuroplasticity. And the reason it's doing it is because the brain is actually signaling to itself, look, it looks like there's going to be a bit of a shift in my environmental situation here. I better build out some more infrastructure so that I can be more ready to respond to this new environmental change that I'm confronting. And so the bad news is that when the amygdala enlarges, it really does keep you locked into that flight and fight and switched on mode. And so you could call this sort of the negative aspect of neuroplasticity, is that you're building out areas of the brain where you really don't want it to be built out, because it is going to impact on your ability to do two things, actually. Firstly, to be able to move into the thinking part, into the prefrontal cortex, when you need to actually start doing some serious analysis around the kind of threat that you're facing. And you can imagine in a SOC environment, you're going to be wanting to actually drill into the actual nature of the threat and start doing some very deep analytical thinking around what that thing is that you're seeing, whether it's a real thing or whether it's a false positive, and then to decide how you're going to respond to that. So the short point is that an enlarged amygdala and negative neuroplastic changes in these parts of the brain are going to impact on your ability to engage in the high-value functions that your work entails. But also there's another counterpoint to this, and that is that, or another dimension at least, and that is that an enlarged amygdala is going to impact on your ability to switch off when you're actually outside of the role, when you're trying to rest and sleep and take some time out. And this is what we commonly observe within SOC teams, is that people often report that this high state of vigilance and hyperactivation that they feel during the workday sort of carries forward into the off time as well. And so that's where we need to start doing a bit of work and helping you actually change the external environment that the brain is encountering and the subjective environment that you're actually experiencing. And the good news is that, again, moving back to our brain slide, that as we start to bring the brain or the mind into states where you are feeling more relaxation and a de-escalation, if we're lowering the cortisol levels and we're bringing you back into a state of equilibrium, which wouldn't normally occur now because of these neuroplastic changes, we're basically, in a way, forcing the brain to switch off initially. But over time, the brain then thinks, okay, we have an environmental shift occurring here that corresponds to a healthier mind state. Maybe I should start building out some infrastructure that maps to emotional regulation and a better sense of just calm as a new default state, where I know that I can return to that when there is actually no danger present. So I hope this is making sense to you. What we're doing is we're trying to bring the brain back into a healthier state of being, where you've got the proper development in those areas that you want to have optimized, and you're de-energizing, if you like, removing neural resource from those areas that would cause unhealthy development in those parts of the brain that are going to keep you switched on. So that's a little bit of a deep dive into some of the basic neuroscience around stress. Burnout really has three dimensions to it that I haven't really touched upon. One of them, though, that is very relevant here is this sense of emotional depletion. And so one of the things that we observe within cybersecurity teams as we start to measure burnout is a sense of people feeling literally drained, emotionally depleted. And if that's not managed, and if we don't find some way to bring back emotional restoration in you, then of course that's going to, in the long term, it's going to be wearing you down. Exactly how the attackers want it to actually roll. You know, we're in a war of attrition where they are actually trying to wear down the defenders. And so I think the importance of our work as Cybermindz is to really rebuild resilience in the brain. Resilience for me means a couple of things. It means emotional resilience, so that you've got the ability to step out of a chaotic situation, and just ground yourself in a deeper, calmer state, which becomes the new default. But also resilience occurs at the neurological level, because now we've got some new neural infrastructure that is going to underpin these subjective states, so that when you've got, you know, greater development in the areas that map to emotional regulation, seeing things in perspective, understanding that there is another place that you can resort to, an area of psychological safety within yourself, then we're actually building the neural infrastructure to support that. So over time, fascinatingly, that becomes a new default, because you've actually got the infrastructure that's bringing it in there and just holding it as your new normal, as it were. So that's the good news. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do that now, specifically the methodology that we use within Cybermindz to actually bring about this new aspect of calm as the new default. Now, during COVID, I was very privileged to meet with Dr. Richard Miller, who was the founder of the iRest Institute and is the developer of the iRest, or the Integrative Restoration Protocol. Now, this is a 10-step sequence that we lead cyber teams through. And the idea is that we progressively bring down the level of neural activity. So we're bringing you into deeper states of relaxation. We're moving you out of the high beta state of brainwave activity, which corresponds with stress and anxiety. And we're bringing the brainwave activity down into the alpha state, where we're getting you into a state of like a daydreamy sort of relaxed state. And as that's happening, we're eliciting the production of hormones in the brain like serotonin, possibly dopamine as well, you may have heard of. But in particular, serotonin is a feel-good hormone. And so we're starting to really hack the neurology and really deliberately bringing down the levels of activation. And in doing that, we're switching you out of the fight-flight mode and back into this other state we call rest and digest. This is really the equilibrium state that the early sort of hunters would have returned to after the threat had passed. And what we're doing is we're deliberately bringing you back in through this guided protocol. After you're in the alpha state, as you go deeper into the protocol, and we're using body sensing and breath sensing and some instructions there, we can actually slow down the brainwave activity even further and getting you into the theta state of brainwave activity, which is almost the borderline state between sleep and or waking and sleep. It's the state that you're in just before you go to sleep. And it's a very interesting state, because often in the theta brainwave states, you're actually getting spikes of gamma brainwave activity, which corresponds to bursts of creativity and insight and problem solving. And so a lot of the great innovators, Tesla, Einstein, the artist Salvador Dali, and Thomas Edison as well, all talked about this state that they could enter into where they could tap into deep, almost intuitive knowledge to get problems, solve solutions to their problems or inspiration. I think even Beethoven referred to this state when he was talking about how he received musical compositions that came into him as a whole thing. So the theta brainwave state is very beneficial. But even more importantly, we can then go down even deeper into the delta brainwave state, which is the brainwave state that you encounter during deep sleep. Now, during the delta brainwave states, you're starting to get a lot of deeper, more important hormones like human growth hormone. So you're getting a lot of physiological restoration, gene repair is occurring. Cortisol levels by then are way down, and you're actually getting increases instead in the ability to repair and restore the brain and the physiology of the body. And also, you get an increase in your immune system, your immunity increases. So this is sort of the trajectory that we're leading you through as we bring you through the protocol. And eventually, the other interesting thing about the protocol, though, is that even though you're in a delta state, and this may take a few sessions to get you to it, you're in a delta state, you actually feel like the body has gone to sleep, but the awareness is still present. And so it's a very powerful state where we can start to work with subconscious drivers that are driving stress and anxiety and fear and maybe past traumas. And you can very safely go and check out what's happening there. And often you'll reach great resolution and a great feeling of freedom when you come out of the state, because you finally sort of acknowledged what wants to be heard at these deeper levels of your being, but in a way that is very detached, and it's almost like watching a movie. So it's a very powerful thing. And Richard Miller had started bringing the protocol into the military in the US around 2004 to 2006. They started doing studies where they found they could actually reverse trauma from returning veterans through undertaking this program. So you can see it has a very powerful use case through the military. And what we're doing in Cybermindz is bringing this to cybersecurity for the first time in the world. So we're really happy about the opportunity to do that, to work with you. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes now, if we have time, giving you a little taste of the protocol so that you can get a sense of what it's like to move into these states of more deactivation of the limbic system and more into a sense of this enduring calm. I'm not going to take you through the full 10 steps of the sequence. That typically takes about 35 minutes. But I am going to give you the first few minutes so you get a little sense of how it feels when the brain starts switching out of the activation of the high focus and attention networks into more of just a rest and restoration network. So I'm going to turn my camera off now, and I'll invite you to turn yours off as well as you sit in a chair, or if you've got the ability to even lie down somewhere where you are. And we'll just do a few minutes of this initial stages of the iRest protocol. Now, as we move attention through body sensing, starting with the area of the jaw and the mouth, sensations in the hinges of the jaw, just letting everything release now, feeling into the mouth, tongue, teeth, gums, the inner walls of the mouth and the lips. And we're just noticing sensations of the mouth and the jaw, up into the cheeks, left and right. Both together at the same time. The ears, the left ear, sensations of the left ear, the right ear, And both ears together at the same time. Sensing into the nose and the nostrils, left and right. As you feel the sensations of the air as it flows through the left nostril, just tuning into that one side, seeing if you can discern the flow through the left nostril of the breath. So bringing awareness down to one point, one small area as you move across to the right nostril. Noticing the relative strength of the flow through each nostril. Are they equal? Is one more than the other? This is called a passive observation of the breath. It can actually be a practice in all of its own. And then sensing into the flow through both nostrils together at the same time. And observing what's happening now in the body and the mind as you just allow awareness to rest with the breath. Letting everything else fall away. All the thoughts, cares and concerns, just let them drift away. Like watching leaves floating down the river. But the awareness just content to be present with the flow of the breath. Effortless, constant, life-giving breath. Bringing awareness up to the eyes now, left and right, as sensation. Both eyes together as sensation. Feeling up into the forehead. Sensations in the forehead and maybe a tingling or a warmth or some feelings that arise as you notice with awareness what's happening in the region of the brows, the forehead and the head, the top of the head, back of the head, back of the neck, and the throat. Feeling the region of the throat opening up. They say there's an energy center in the throat that associates with your power of communication. If that's true, allow awareness to fully enter into the region of the throat as you acknowledge this power of communication. Let's move down through the arms now, from the shoulders down to the fingertips on each side. We're starting at the left shoulder. Down through the upper arm, elbow, forearm, wrist and hand, palm of the left hand, the back of the hand. As we allow awareness to rest progressively through each finger of the thumb, index finger, middle finger, ring finger, and the little finger of the left hand, the fingers, the palm, the wrist, the entire left arm as sensation. Heavy and relaxed. Across to the right shoulder as we work down through the upper arm, elbow, forearm, wrist, palm of the right hand, back of the hand, the right thumb, index finger, middle finger, ring finger, and the little finger of the right hand. The fingers, the hand, the wrist, the entire right arm as sensation, heavy and relaxed. And then feeling both arms together as sensation, a vibrant aliveness pulsating or radiating through the arms as they lie or rest, heavy and relaxed. You bring awareness now into the chest, the abdomen, and feeling the movements of the chest and the abdomen as the breath cycle unfolds. This constancy, rhythmic motion of the mechanism of the breath response. Nothing to fix or change. Everything just as it is. Bringing in sensations of the back from the upper back all the way down through to the lower back. The entire left side of the torso, the right side, all the internal organs of the chest and the abdomen. And then if you can, to unite all of these sensory fields into one orb or field of radiance, as the torso is a complete and perfect component of the body. Reaching awareness down now into the hips, with the left hip. We're going to move progressively down the left leg, through the left thigh, knee, calf and the shin, the ankle, the foot, the toes and the foot, the entire left leg from the hip down to the foot and the toes as sensation. Heavy and relaxed. Then to the right hip, thigh, knee, calf and shin, the ankle, and foot and toes, the toes and the foot, the entire right leg as sensation. Heavy and relaxed. Both legs together now as complementary and balanced. Heavy and relaxed. And then if you can loop together the various fields of the body that we've traversed, from the legs, uniting sensations of the legs with that of the torso, the arms, the head and the neck. and feeling now the entire physical body as a field of radiant sensation. So just to recap on the main points today then, firstly, to acknowledge the importance and the value of the work that you do within SOC. We had a look at some of the pressures that may be unique to SOC. I'm thinking particularly around this constancy of the virtual threat environment and how important it is that we actually need to manage those stresses. The neuroscience is certainly very fascinating. I hope that you've got a bit of an understanding, a working knowledge at least now, of why it is that we need to protect our neurology, our brain. And the way to do that is through techniques like those that we bring through Cybermindz. Also to thank Devo, we have a commitment here from a company that is more concerned about the human aspects of cybersecurity and protecting those people that are protecting the rest of society, in fact. Just look after yourselves. It's necessary for you to take the time out to really nurture the team environment. I think it's necessary to recognize that, we're all in this together, but also that there is hope, that we do have means of supporting you so that you can remain happy and not just survive, but also to thrive in these roles. So thank you for your attention, and we'll hope to see you soon.